The city was not always loud, but it was always heavy, not with noise exactly, but with feelings people carried and never put down. Old anger, quiet fear, long memories. Streets were full, yet somehow everyone walked alone. People passed each other every day, close enough to touch, yet far enough to never really meet. Some parts of the city blamed other parts. Some groups spoke only to their own. Conversations had turned sharp over the years, shorter and colder. Even small talk felt risky. Most people had learned to keep their eyes low and their thoughts private. It wasn't hatred that ruled the place. It was distance. In the middle of all this stood a small public square. Long ago, it had been a place where people rested, talked, laughed, and waited for friends. Now it was mostly empty. People crossed it quickly, as if staying too long might invite trouble or awkwardness. The benches were worn. The ground was marked by old stains and faded lines. Nothing dangerous about it, just forgotten. Then one morning, something strange appeared there. It was a piano, not new, not shiny. Just an old upright piano with chipped paint and soft scratches along the sides. One key sat a little lower than the others. A corner was cracked. Someone had clearly carried it there, with effort and care. No one saw who brought it. There was no sign explaining why it was there. No camera, no guard. Just a small handwritten message taped above the keys. Play if you dare to be heard. People stopped when they saw it. Some slowed their steps. Some stared from far away. A few laughed quietly and shook their heads. Others pulled out their phones, took a picture, and walked on. By evening, nothing had happened. The piano stood untouched, like it didn't belong. A few kids dared each other to touch it, then ran away laughing. Someone joked that it would be broken by morning. Another said it would be painted over or taken away. The city had learned not to expect. Gentle things to last. The next day passed the same way. The piano waited. People passed. No one sat down. On the third evening, just before the sky turned dark, an older man stopped in front of it. He didn't look special. His clothes were plain and slightly worn. His back bent forward a little, as if life had pressed on it for many years. He stood there longer than most people did, reading the small message again and again. His hands shook when he reached out. Not from fear exactly, more from habit. From years of holding things in, from being careful, he sat slowly on the bench. It made a soft sound under his weight. A few people nearby noticed and slowed their walk. No one spoke. He placed his fingers on the keys. The first note was not clean. It came out soft and uneven. He paused, almost stood up again, then tried once more. This time the sound settled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fast, but it carried something warm. He played a simple tune, one that felt old, one that didn't try to impress. It moved slowly, like someone remembering something important. People began to stop. A woman holding a bag stood still without realizing it. A delivery rider leaned his bike against a pole. Someone sitting on the bus steps looked up from their phone. The square grew quiet in a new way, not empty, but listening. The man's hands moved carefully, as if speaking a language he hadn't used in a long time. A few notes slipped. A few were late, but no one minded. In fact, those small mistakes made it feel more real. When he finished, there was a pause. No clapping. No cheers, just a breath shared by strangers. Then he stood, nodded once to no one in particular, and walked away. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, someone uploaded a short video of the moment. The sound wasn't great. The picture shook a little. Yet something about it felt honest. The comments were quiet at first. People said things like, "That felt peaceful," or "I didn't know I needed that." By morning, more people had seen it. The piano became a small topic of talk, not a big one. Just a curious one. Some said it was a nice idea. Others said it was pointless. A few argued that it was just another distraction, that music wouldn't fix anything, and they were right. In a way, music couldn't fix everything, but it could open a door. That afternoon, a teenager stopped by the piano. Their headphones hung around their neck. They looked around, unsure. Then they sat down and began to tap out a rhythm, fast and playful, built from sounds they had learned online. It didn't sound like the old man's tune at all. It was rough and bold. Some older people frowned. Some younger ones smiled. A small crowd formed again. Different from the first. The beat pulled people in. Feet moved. Heads nodded. Someone laughed out loud, surprised by their own reaction. The teenager finished with a sharp final sound and stood up quickly, cheeks red, pretending not to care. But their eyes shined as they walked away. Later came someone else. Then another. A tired worker in a uniform played a slow song with heavy pauses, like each note carried the weight of a long day. A person with careful hands played something soft and steady, almost like a lullaby. Someone else pressed random keys just to hear the noise, then laughed at themselves. Each person left something behind without meaning to. A feeling. A moment, a trace of who they were. Still, not everyone was happy. Online, people argued. Some said the piano was being used to pretend everything was fine. Others said it was being used to push certain messages. Words grew sharp again. The old lines returned quickly. People took sides, even over something as small as a piano in the square. Tension could be felt under the quiet moments. Some stood far apart, watching each other more than the keys. Some crossed their arms. Some whispered. It was clear the city was not healed. It was only curious. One afternoon, clouds hung low and gray. The air felt heavy, like it might rain but couldn't decide. Fewer people were around. The piano looked lonely again, small against the wide space two people approached it from. Opposite sides. They stopped when they noticed each other. Both hesitated. They were not strangers in the normal sense. They had seen each other before, many times across meetings, streets, and shared spaces. They knew of each other not by name, but by difference. By the invisible lines everyone pretended not to draw. Neither smiled, neither spoke. For a long moment, they just stood there. The piano between them like a question no one wanted to ask. A few people nearby sensed something was happening. They slowed down. A quiet tension filled the air, thick and uncomfortable. One of them took a small step forward, then stopped. The other folded their arms, then slowly let them drop. Their eyes met briefly, then moved away. The piano waited. Its keys caught a bit of light as the clouds shifted. The message taped above it fluttered slightly in the breeze. Play if you dare to be heard. One of them reached out, not confidently, not boldly. Just enough to touch a single key. The sound rang out, soft, unsure but clear. The other person flinched. Then did something unexpected. They sat down on the opposite side of the bench. Quiet ripple passed through the few people watching. No one spoke. No one filmed. The two sat stiffly at first, not looking at each other. The space between them felt full of years that had never been spoken out loud. The first person pressed another key, then paused. The second added a note. It didn't match perfectly. It wasn't planned. But it didn't clash either. For a moment, that was all there was, two notes hanging in the air. Uncertain, waiting, and then, slowly, something began to form. Not a song yet. Just a fragile beginning, the kind that could break easily or become something more. And that was when the city, without realizing it, leaned in to listen. The two notes hung in the air longer than anyone expected. They were not loud. They were not clean or perfect. But they stayed, as if the air itself wanted to hold them for a moment longer. The space around the piano felt different, almost careful. Even the usual sounds of the street seemed to step back. Lowering themselves out of respect, people nearby stopped without realizing why. Feet slowed. Conversations faded. A passing bicycle rolled more gently. It was as if something fragile had appeared and no one wanted to disturb it. The two people sitting at the piano did not look at each other. Their shoulders were stiff, backs slightly tense. Their hands hovered just above the keys, unsure of what should happen next. The space between them felt full. Not empty, full of old thoughts, old beliefs, and quiet distance built over years of never really meeting. Then one of them pressed another key. The sound came slowly, carefully, like a foot testing thin ice on a frozen lake. It was soft and unsure, but honest. The note settled beside the others without forcing its place. The second person waited just a moment longer than needed. Then they added a note of their own. It didn't fit perfectly. It wasn't meant to, but it didn't fight either. It leaned in, gently, like a hand reaching out without knowing if it would be taken. Something small began to grow. Between those sounds, not a song yet, not even a melody, more like a question being asked without words. The people watching felt the shift before they could explain it. Someone nearby let out a slow breath they didn't realize they had been holding. Another person shifted their weight, leaning closer. A few heads tilted, as if listening more carefully might help them understand. What was happening, no one spoke. The two at the piano began to listen to each other more closely. Not just to the notes, but to the spaces between them. Their hands started to move with more trust. A simple pattern appeared, then changed, then returned again in a softer way. Sometimes one lead, choosing the direction. Sometimes the other followed. Sometimes they paused at the same time, surprised by the silence they had created together. That silence did not feel awkward. It felt full. It was not about talent. Anyone could hear that. The playing was simple. A few missed notes. Uneven timing. Small mistakes, but none of that mattered. What mattered was tension. What mattered was the choice to stay instead of pulling away. The sound grew warmer as the minutes passed. Softer, yet somehow stronger. It carried something gentle that wrapped itself around the people listening. A child sitting on the edge of the square began to swing their legs slowly, humming without meaning to. A person standing behind them wiped their eyes quickly and looked away, hoping no one had noticed. Another lowered their phone halfway through lifting it, then slipped it back into their pocket. For once, no one rushed to record. They were too busy being there. The music moved in small waves. It did not rush forward. It breathed. It paused. It waited. It allowed space for feeling. When the final note faded, it didn't disappear right away. It seemed to hang in the air, like the last glow after a sunset. Neither of the players stood up. They sat still, hands resting in their laps, shoulders slowly relaxing. Their breathing softened. The silence afterward felt full instead of empty, like something had been placed gently in the middle of it. After a few seconds, one of them turned slightly and gave a small nod, not a big gesture. Not dramatic, just a simple sign of thanks. The other returned it, just as quietly. Nothing more was said. But something had clearly shifted in the days that followed. People began to come to the square more often, not in crowds, not all at once, just little by little, like drops of water finding the same path. Word spread in soft ways. A short message sent to a friend. A quiet clip shared with no caption. A sentence spoken while passing by. There's something nice happening over there. The piano became a place where people paused, even if they didn't plan to. Some came early in the morning, when the light was pale and the city still half asleep. The air felt clean then, and the sounds carried far. A few would sit down before work, play a handful of notes, and leave with slower steps than when they arrived. Others came late in the evening, when their shoulders were heavy and their thoughts crowded. They didn't always play. Sometimes they just sat nearby, listening to whoever happened to be there one evening. A person who worked long hours stopped in front of the piano. Their movements were slow, tired. They sat down and let their fingers fall onto the keys without much thought. The tune that came out was low and stretched, full of pauses. It sounded like a long breath finally being released. When they finished, they stayed seated, staring at nothing in particular. Their face softened, as if something inside had quietly loosened its grip. Another day. Someone who had not touched a piano since they were very young pressed a few keys with shaking fingers. The notes came out uneven and unsure. They laughed softly at themselves, almost apologizing to the air. A stranger nearby smiled back, not in judgment, not with advice, just with understanding. Sometimes two people played together. Sometimes three. Sometimes one played while another hummed or tapped lightly on the bench. Sometimes no one played at all. People simply sat in the shared quiet. There was no plan, no schedule, no excuse. It just happened. The piano did not fix the city. The problems did not disappear. People still disagreed. Old hurts did not vanish overnight. Hard days still came. But something small began to shift under the surface. People started waiting instead of pushing, listening instead of reacting, pausing before speaking. Not always. Not perfectly. But more often than before, the square itself seemed to change. Not brighter, not louder, just warmer, like a place that had learned how to hold people gently. One cold morning, someone left a small cup of tea beside the piano. No note, no name. Just warmth offered to whoever came next. Another day, someone folded a piece of paper and placed it on the bench. It held only a few simple words. "Thank you for being here." No one ever claimed it. The piano slowly gathered marks of use. New scratches appeared. Some keys faded more than others. The wood lost its shine. Instead of making it less special, these signs made it feel more alive. It no longer looked like something placed there by accident. It looked like it belonged. One evening, before sunset, the two who had first played together arrived again at nearly the same time. They noticed each other and smiled without surprise. There was no tension now. No stiffness. Only a quiet ease. They sat down side by side without thinking about it. Their playing had changed. It was lighter, more playful. Sometimes one would begin a tune, and the other would twist it gently in a new direction. Sometimes they laughed when a note came out wrong. Sometimes they stopped just to listen to the sounds around them. Footsteps, wind, distant voices. A few people gathered nearby, but no one treated it like a performance. It felt more like being allowed into a private moment that happened to be shared as the sun lowered. The light turned soft and golden. The music slowed, stretching out like a long exhale. The city seemed to move at the same pace, calmer, quieter. When the final notes faded, one of the players spoke for the first time, their voice low and simple. "Thank you," the other nodded, eyes bright with feeling. That was all that needed to be said after that. The piano became more than an object sitting in a square. It became a pause in the middle of busy lives, a place where people could arrive without needing to explain themselves. Someone would stop after a long day and play just a few notes before heading home. Someone else would listen for a moment before continuing on their way. A few began to exchange small words, small smiles, small kindnesses. Nothing big, nothing forced. Just enough to remind them that the person standing nearby was human too. The city did not suddenly agree on everything. It did not become perfect or peaceful overnight. But the sharp edges softened. The space between people felt less heavy. They began to recognize each other not by labels, but by moments. The one who played softly in the morning, the one who always listened from the steps, the one who laughed when they missed a note. These small things began to matter more than anyone expected. One evening, long after the square had emptied, the piano sat alone again. The lights above it flickered gently. A cool breeze moved the small piece of paper taped above the keys. "Play, if you dare to be heard." The words looked different now. Not like a challenge, more like an open door, an invitation to be honest, to be imperfect, to take a small risk and trust that someone might listen. Somewhere nearby, a window glowed with warm light. Inside, a person hummed a tune they had heard earlier that day without even realizing where it came from. Another person walked home thinking about a moment at the piano that had stayed with them longer than expected. The change was quiet, almost invisible, but it was real, and it kept moving. Slowly and gently, from one heart to another, the piano remained in the square, worn and patient, waiting for the next set of hands, waiting for the next story, waiting for the next moment when someone chose to sit down instead of walk past, because healing, it turned out, did not arrive through loud, speeches, or sudden miracles. It arrived in small notes, shared pauses, and the brave choice to listen one moment at a time.